Hey everyone, how's it going? Today I wanted to do another video talking a little bit more about Satan's little season. So I was looking into this a bit more and found some interesting stuff. So if you guys remember in my previous video, I mentioned the mud floods. So I think that they're hiding like a mud flood that occurred on the earth from us, and I think the reason for that is because this occurred at the end of the millennial kingdom and transitioned us to Satan's little season. So that makes a lot of sense that that's when it occurred. It was like kind of like a reset, and so it's like Satan coming out of the pit from these mud floods and things like that. At least that's my theory, right? And you wonder, why would they hide this even though we have a lot of evidence for it? And I think that's one of the reasons, to hide the millennial kingdom and the mud flood basically resetting that and bringing us to Satan's little season. But anyways, the point is, I found a connection between the floods in the scripture, like the Genesis flood, the mud flood, and then a future flood as well, which I'm going to get into a little bit later on in the video. But I find this very interesting. So, like these three, I noticed a pattern, and these are three floods, right? So, the Genesis flood, of course, we all know was when God flooded the world and he saved Noah and his family. And so we know about that story. And then, of course, we have the mud flood, which is my theory that happened at the end of the millennial kingdom, going into Satan's little season. I don't know for sure, but that seems to make a lot of sense. And then we have the lake of fire, which I believe is also another flood that's going to occur on the earth. And because it's called the lake of fire, and that's when God blows the fire down on the earth at the end of the little season, right? So it says God will blow down on the fire in the earth. That's what produces the lake of fire, right? I made another video about that, but that's exactly what produces. The lake of fire is just, it's connected to that verse, like a few verses down. That's what it is, right? And so it's funny, I never realized that before, but that's literally what it is. So that's kind of neat. But anyways, point is that that's going to produce a flood, right? The lake of fire, when God blows down the fire, produces a flood. It creates a reset, and it creates a new earth. So that kind of sounds familiar from the previous floods. Now, this is going to be the final flood, right? The final flood of fire, lake of fire, that's going to come on the earth, and it's going to reset everything. It's going to bring us on to new earth, right? That's going to be the transition. But it's interesting how, like, I noticed this pattern with these three floods, how, like, the same thing happened in the Genesis flood. Basically, there's a reset, God wiped all the Nephilim and things like that. But you know what? The thing I was thinking about, and then like with the mud floods, I want to know what you guys think about this because I don't know. But with the mud floods, if we want to try to get a little bit more information about the transitional period from the millennial kingdom to Satan's little season, like if we want to get more information, how that looked like, how was the transition like, different things like that, I feel like this could give us a little bit of a hint, like if I'm just saying if the mud floods reset everything, and that's what like ended the Satan's little season, ended the millennial kingdom, brought us into Satan's little season. Like if that's the case, then maybe we can make a connection like with a similar pattern, like with the Genesis flood, right? Because it seems with these three floods, there seems to be a common connection, right? How it resets everything and how different things like that. So maybe I'm wrong about this. It's very possible, right? This channel is all speculative, right? I love talking about this stuff and it's fun to learn about this stuff, right? But I just find that interesting how there are these connections, right? And I think a lot of people are thinking the same thing I'm thinking, right? Or that I thought initially. God promised not to flood the earth again, right? And that's exactly what I was thinking until I went to the scripture, until I went to Genesis 9:15, and I found something very interesting. So Genesis 9:15 says, "And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh." So that was God's promise to the earth to not flood the world with water. And notice, what caught my attention is how it specifically has the word water in this. So I feel like that's intentional. I feel like it's not that there's not going to be any more floods of any kind, right? But this is talking about specifically about like the flood of water, right? Because it says, "And the waters shall not no more become a flood to destroy all flesh." So I just find it interesting how it's specifically mentioning that God wouldn't flood the earth by water, right? So that seems to really like connect the dots to me, at least. How the Genesis flood is related to the mud flood. Then, of course, the third flood at the very end, which is the lake of fire. So I don't know if you guys see this, but that's how I see it. So Yeah, so I mean, we have as we know, the Genesis flood that reset everything, and then we have like the mud flood, which I believe reset everything. There was the millennial kingdom, then became Satan's little season. Then now, which I think is soon, I actually do think the little season will end soon, as I mentioned before. It will be God blowing the fire down on earth, and that will create the third flood, right? The lake of fire, and that will reset everything forever, right? And then we'll have new earth. So I just find that interesting. But another thing I find interesting is with the connections, it's so cool how God works, how there's these patterns and stuff like that. You see how in Genesis, he only saved a few. He saved a few from the flood, right? He saved Noah and his family. And we know in the lake of fire, who's going to be saved from the lake of fire? Believers, right? There's a narrow few, we know that. So there's that. So how about the mud flood? Could this now, given that pattern, given that we see these two connections from the Genesis flood and the lake of fire, can that kind of give us a hint that there may have been a remnant, like a few people who were saved from the mud flood during at the end of the millennial kingdom? So I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know how that would work. I'm asking you guys if you guys have any ideas about that. If somehow, I don't know, if these few people repopulated the earth, how did that look like? Why were they saved? If this even happened, right? But like, I'm just kind of like trying to connect the dots, right? And I'm just thinking of these things. I'm seeing these patterns, and it makes a lot of sense that maybe there were like a few people saved from the mud floods too, given these pattern of events. And so, and how does that connect to today in the season we're in Satan's little season? So I really don't know, like I'm confused about that as well. But I don't know. I guess maybe we won't know until we go to heaven. But we do have those, like I mentioned, I did talk about this before in my previous video. We do have evidence of like there being mental institutions, orphan trains, things like that during this transitional period. I mentioned there may have been this huge MK Ultra mind control operation or something. Those things may have happened too, right? Those things could have happened easily. But like I'm just wondering, if there was a remnant that were saved from this mud flood. I wonder how that worked. Were they sent to mental institutions? Did they repopulate the earth? That stuff I don't know. So I'm wondering what you guys think. Maybe we'll come up with some other ideas together as a community, and maybe we'll get to the bottom of that. But I do find those connections interesting. And again, maybe I'm all wrong about this, but I just noticed these patterns, and maybe it does mean something. So I thought I'd share that with you guys. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. All right, God bless.